Your bags were on the move. Rhythm and Rome got nothing to lose. Culture clash from coast to coast. Misconceptions, we chasing ghosts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rhythm and Rome podcast, where we bring to you the cultural adventures from around the world, people that love to travel, and the interactions that they have within the community when they travel. Today we have myself, Benef, and Paul and Trisha. So we are going to interview John McEntire, and he is extremely interesting guest that has worked and traveled all over the world and has used those cultural interactions to influence his leadership style and his coaching for executives within corporate in the corporate world.
All right, so let's get with the first one. The first one is, if you could have an unlimited supply of one thing, what would it be?
If I could have an unlimited supply of one thing, what would it be?
And I won't be mad if you said why as well.
Why? Okay.
Why?
Well, just because of the turmoil that's been going on in the U.S. for the last little while, I would say that I'd like to have people like in the middle, and I'm really a consensus fan, okay? I mean, consensus building comes from my Japanese background, and I would just like people to be able to understand each other better. So that's my honest answer right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? Can you make that happen?
Yeah.
That's my mission.
Yeah.
My mission.
Let's do it.
Oh my God.
More people that are willing to have conversations and come to a consensus. Yes.
Yes.
I think it should be
Yeah.
something where we just make it mandatory that everyone must travel somewhere they don't know, and then go from there, kind of thing too as well. All right, so let's touch on another one, and I love your answer, so thank you for that. If you had to live in a different country for a year, which one would it be that you would choose?
I think it would be New Zealand.
Yes.
I like it. You're my friend.
Welcome to the family, John. You have now officially part of the Rhythm and Roll
You
family.
are
'Cause
my
absolutely
family.
all three of us is New Zealand is on the top of our list.
But wait, south or north?
Oh, I traveled through both, and both are beautiful. I can't say south or north because I just like to be all over the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll give you that one.
Yeah,
Would
it
you
Well,
rent one of the RV and just drive around? Would you do that for a year?
would be awesome. That would be cool. Yeah, that would be really cool.
Well, and I want to thank you, John, for reaching out to us because, you have such an interesting background with the way that you grew up and then all the travel that you've done and working internationally and then taking all that cultural experience to help you with your leadership training, and you have this program called Synchronize Yourself Naturally within your community. So we wanted to just sort of understand how the cultural aspect and all the travel, influenced the creation of your work. So that's kind of the
premise for our
framework
discussion with you.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, let's just jump right into it. How did growing up or having that multicultural household influence travel for you? I mean, what was that pull?
So the household was two different things. One was, I just tell people that I grew up around the United Nations table, and this was because we had Japanese, German, Uruguayan, foreign exchange students. We had a Laotian family when there was political turmoil, a civil war. 6 people came to our house on Christmas Eve, and we gave up our Christmas
Oh, wow.
to help them out, and they lived with us for 6 months until we were able to get them into their own place. And then we had Navajo foster brothers. I had cousins and everything, but we also had some people would say are undesirables in our house too, and that were people that just got out of prison or were drug addicts and things like that. I mean, my parents, my dad was a doctor.
Okay, John. Wait, rewind.
Wait, because you said 6 people lived with you for 6 months. How big was this house? I don't that's the. I'm still kind of wrapped around.
We had a family in the neighborhood who had 10 kids, and 8 were still at home, and so 10 people lived in our house for about another 8 months. I wasn't in the house at that time, but their house had burnt down. And so my parents were just really giving. Now, my father was an orthopedic surgeon. We did okay, but we didn't live really lavishly. We had a 5,000 square foot house, and so it was the largest in the neighborhood, where the other ones were like between 2,000 and 3,000, square feet. But these people would be in our, they'd take over our basement, and so we would be distributed out in different parts of the house to help accommodate this. And so it was all just, I don't know, to me that was kind of natural. My wife and I, after we moved back from Tokyo, my wife is Japanese, but after we moved back from Tokyo, being there for 5 years after I had graduated from university, we ended up a year later this old mansion in Bloomington, Illinois, and we had made it a bed and breakfast. So this idea of sharing the house and everything was different. Okay, but yeah, it's not so much the size of the house, it's just really the
warmth,
care that my parents had for other people. So that was my growing up. But the other side of that was that by the time I was 22, I had traveled to 19 countries, all 50 U.S. states, and 8 provinces and territories in Canada. And so that travel was because my dad loved to travel, and my mom did too. But we would, every year take a month off, and 1 year would be domestic, and the next year would be international.
That's amazing.
And so time in history, a lot of people didn't travel. So, I mean, we were kind of the oddballs and I always felt like an oddball because I had all this cultural experience, but everybody else, most people were not traveling outside of the state. And so my kids felt like they were also the oddballs because we lived all over the place as they were growing. From that aspect, I knew from an early age, and I just had this thought in my mind from very young that everybody is a piece of the puzzle of life. And it's each one of those pieces that has color and texture and beauty that we as a humankind, we need to pull it out of people, and we need to be able to recognize and celebrate everybody's differences. And it's those differences that really make the world a beautiful place. And so that's what came out of those activities. There's one other aspect of my life that also helped me understand this and get into leadership. And that was that from the age of 9 to 19, I was heavily involved with theater. And I had this, I'm an empath, and I was highly intuitive as a youth, still run by intuition. But my mom and dad had a lady over for dinner. We had seen that lady at the Playhouse in town in a musical the night before, and I was just enthralled with the theater. And I was just laying on the couch when my mom and her were talking, and she was just talking about how beautiful the theater was and how it worked and how exciting it was. And I was just excited. And then she told my mom, there's going to be tryouts for The Sound of Music, in about a month. You ought to try out, Nancy. And my mom just said, that's silly. I could never do that. And anyway, when the lady left, I told my parents that I was supposed to be at that tryout. And they just kind of patted me on the head. Oh, John, that's really cute. You've never sung in front of anybody before, and you don't even talk to anybody. So how could you get on a stage? So they just really kind of pushed it aside. And so for a month, during carpool, at the dinner table, I would just bring this up. And so finally, a couple days before, I said, well, I guess you're not going to take me, so I'll have to take the bus. And where we were living at the time was the bus would take me into these dark places in the city. And so they said, well, we can't do that, so they took me. And when I got on the stage, there's hundreds of people in this auditorium, and this big voice came out of this little 9-year-old body. And then that just helped me understand the importance of community. And so when it comes to the theater, I learned early on that the theater is like a city, and that city has a mayor, and that mayor happens to be the director. And the director, it's all up to the directors to be able to pull all those different parts into this thing. So, what we think is that these people with their names on the marquees are, the ones that run the show and everything. But I learned early on that it really was not just those stars, that it was the townspeople, it was the people who did the lights and the sound and the sets and the costumers that were up until 3 a.m. trying to make sure that something was fixed or whatever. The people pushing the brooms, the people, the ushers, everybody was really important. And so recognizing that everybody had a part in that organization and that structure, knew when you were in the green room, there was this really nice gelling vibe. You're just, everybody's together, and you just have these vibrations that are just so intense that that's going to be an A+ show. Okay. But if there's petty jealousies, people bickering, backbiting, trying to prove that they're better than somebody else, taking the show, you knew it was going to be B- or less. It was just so intense. And so that's where a lot of my theory comes from in regards to leadership and having those puzzle pieces. And as a leader, you need to make sure that you put margin around those puzzle pieces so that people can grow into it. So they have this beautiful dovetailing that happens, so that everybody can become what they're supposed to, not just what that position is originally. If they can get their personality in there, then they can ultimately build it to be better than what you even thought it could be. And all these people doing that together, you've got something that's immensely important.
Well, and so I guess the question I have to go along with that is so when you started working in international spaces and bringing that concept of the community of the theater, but now you're working like in an organization, and there's all these different people with all these different belief systems and values, and now like how did you manage to do that with the vast cultural differences and the different languages?
So a very good question. Thanks for that question. So after high school, I did 1 semester at the university, and then I decided, because I was heavily involved in school, in high school, and I'd gotten some scholarships and stuff, but I just was kind of tired when I got into college. And so I took 2 years off, and I was a missionary for my church, and I ended up going to Japan. So, going to Japan, I had to learn Japanese, and then I fell in love with the Japanese culture and the Japanese language itself. And that was really the foray into me starting to live in another country and seeing how the natives live, and recognizing that, at first when you go to a country, you all travel so much, this, but you go to a country and there's like this honeymoon period and everything. Oh, this is so beautiful. This is so nice. And look how much more clean this is than where I live, or all these things are beautiful. And then you live there for like 3 to 6 months. All of a sudden you start to see, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into, and you see the natural side. You think, well, they do this backwards and they're just this. And then by the time you get to a year, then all of a sudden it's kind of evened out. And then you realize, oh, there's beauty all over the place. And what you need to do is try to figure out how you put those different pieces together. So that was my foray into living internationally, understanding how the people who lived in my house felt. Okay.
Right.
So it's all of a sudden being the minority, okay, in a place, and seeing how that had positives and a lot of negatives to it, And so that helped me have more sympathy to other people who feel like they're in those types of situations. But the other thing that came from the Japanese was this idea of consensus building. And because I was thinking, Tokyo, 35 million people. How do they living in these rabbit hutches, right on top of each other?
Yeah.
Right.
Paper thin walls, how can they get along so well? And then I got thinking about it. Well, everything in Japan is about consensus building. It's about, doing your part to make sure that the whole is much better. And you were talking about cleanliness and everything in that other podcast that I listened to, one of the other ones that I listened to of yours. And Tokyo was, you were saying Japan was so clean and everything. Well, it's because they're taught that from an early age that they are to be a good citizen. And so being that good citizen is really important. But if you think about the way the Japanese make decisions, it's not top down. It's actually from bottom up. And it comes from the middle, and it's called Ringi Seido. And Ringi Seido is the circular thing. That's the Ringi, and Seido is system. And so basically, you have these people from the bottom, like maybe the factory floor, saying to their middle manager, hey, we could do this better if we could change this. And so then they talk to other middle managers, then they talk to their people, and they get all this consensus building built up, and then it goes up to the top, and it's a rubber stamp that makes the decision. It's not a top-down thing where people are feeling rejected or dejected, or they're not feeling part of the process. It's that whole process of being part of the decision-making that helps things out. There's a thing called nemawashi in Japan, and what ne is roots, okay? And mawasu is to dig around the roots. So you have these beautiful bonsai trees. And, how do you keep them, so beautiful, and they're asymmetric, and they're tiny and everything? Well, you do that by not just clipping and pruning and doing wires, but there's also a facet of digging the roots, okay? And when you dig around the roots, okay, you're allowing it to, aerate and grow more. But the thing is, they do that before they transplant it from one pot to another pot or another plot. So what they do is they bring soil in from the new place that they're going to into the pot, and then it germinates. It just basically,
Right.
it's like wine. It takes time, and it just basically aerates and gets involved with all those roots, and it's less traumatic when that plant is transplanted.
Yeah.
So that nemawashi thing is all what Japanese culture is about.
Yeah.
So, John, I would just want to switch to your coaching program, and if you could just explain a little bit about your Eastern, basically taking your blend of Eastern and Western cultures. How do you implement that in your coaching program, or how are you able to blend the two to be able to coach?
So basically, I call myself an executive orchestration coach. And so basically, I'm helping executives who have just gone from maybe a VP position to a senior vice president or executive vice president or COO position. What got them to that point, okay, is not going to keep them there, okay? They need to actually grow. They've tended to climb up the ladder. They've been successful in everything, but if they stay that same person, they're not going to go anywhere else. So what I learned from my travels and having all these different people in the house and just being around culture is that there was a difference between how I was being raised in the US with Western education and everything, and also, how people in the East were being taught and everything. Having a Japanese wife, I also learned more in regards to what she liked about her situation and what she didn't like about her situation. So she really wanted to raise our kids in the US because even though the Japanese education system was good in, science and math and the engineering and things like that, they had to do a lot of school after school after school daily. And she didn't want our kids to be involved like that, and she didn't want them to be little robots. Okay. So there's a side of the American or the Western way of growing up where when you're with your teacher, your professor, you're not on an equal plane with them, but they allow you to ask questions and what we should be able to do is to question everything and talk about everything and
engage.
And it's that engagement that you get graded on. Whereas in Japan, in the East, you've got this sensei, you've got this master who is telling you something, and they're taught that they're supposed to absorb this. They're supposed to follow that as the apprentice. The deshi is the Japanese word for apprentice. And you because questioning is very difficult. So what I learned working with all these different types of people and what I help leaders with is that, so I had a client the other day, and this happens often, where they'll say, I just hired this, these two people, one from Japan, one from India, and they're software people and they know their jobs inside and out and such. But then I give them a job and everything, or I tell them that I want something done, but nothing gets done. And I said, well, so did you give them what you wanted them to do exactly? Did you give them a roadmap? Because that's what people from the East need to have. They need to understand where the guidelines are so that they don't feel like they're, going above and beyond that's going to threaten their teacher, their boss, But they don't want to go under that either. And so they're waiting for something. So I would say that you should probably just talk to them and let them know, heartfelt wise, how you work and what you would like to see from them, and you can ask them how comfortable they are doing what they're doing, and what would make them more comfortable. And you'll get to a point where they'll understand you, and then they'll see that their piece of the puzzle with that margin actually allows them to be more than what they were supposed to. And so then they can actually go in and do the things that they can do, but actually do it in a way that is more beneficial than you could even think of. So
Sure.
it's those differences in understanding how people grew up and their culture and everything, and making sure that you do that thing. So going back to the United Nations table that I grew up at, wherever I go, I try to have, these potluck dinners, with the team, and have people bring food that they love, that comes from their culture, so that people can get to understand the beauty and everything of those things. And so, food is one of those things that's apolitical, and it just basically shows the culture and is able to help people understand what that is. So getting back to your question, Tricia, the synchronize yourself naturally within your community. The yourself part is really, how do you personalize that for yourself? So before I left Japan, or not Japan, before I left Doha, this was in the middle of COVID. And when COVID had started, I was trying to think, my wife had promised me 5 years in Doha. We were now at 7, and I needed to figure out, what am I doing next, because she needed to go back to the States, and she and my daughter, my youngest daughter, wanted to go to high school, where we're at, where the high school has a program, Running Start, that you do most of your classes through the junior college and everything. And so she was able to get her associate's degree and her diploma at the same time. And so they were home already, and I was in Doha, and I decided that I wanted to write a book. And so I got into a book writing course, and one of my coaches was Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing about Jack was that I was on the first call with him, and there was like hundreds of people in this call, the Zoom room. And he just all of a sudden points out, John Taylor McEntire. He goes, we're the same. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, he goes, I was born John Taylor Canfield. And ultimately, he took the moniker of Jack Canfield because an aunt whose son was named Jack, he had died tragically, but she had helped him and paid for his military school and everything in high school. And so he had a really good education because of that. But from that moment, he became a very important mentor of mine. From the book writing, which I was doing something on consensus building, he had told me, he says, I wonder, consensus building is really an interesting topic, but can you really write a book on that? And I got thinking about it, and this took a long time, like 4 years to really get to this point. But in the meantime, I got enthralled with what Jack was doing in his success principles, and and I became a certified success principles methodology coach. And so the yourself part happens to be really a lot of the success principles, how you become a leader, and how you pull things out of other people, and what do you need to do to be able to do that. So that's the yourself part, personalizing it. And then this synchronize is really, how do you build consensus? Well, that's where you have to make sure that language is on the same level. How do you get language? So I have these language alignment matrix that I help these leaders through, a cultural alignment matrix. I work through breaking the curse of Babel. Every organization has a curse of Babel. And what that is that everybody's speaking these different languages in their own little thing. Finance speaks finance, factory floor people speak factory floor,
Right.
engineers speak their language. And you need to make sure you have common language so that as you're working on the mission of the organization, that you can really understand that. The naturalized part is where a lot of the Eastern, Western type philosophy things come through. And also the dealing with intuition, trying to naturalize those things that are outside of ourselves. So what do we learn from history? What do we learn from other cultures? What do we learn from other philosophies? And how do we pull those together so that we're the best we can? And then the community is is just seeing how community works in all these different places. Probably the biggest thing that I learned from the Arab culture was the importance of family, the tribal aspect and everything. So how do you make sure the tribal aspect stays positive and you get the silo stuff out of there was really a learning point that I learned from there. So pulling all those pieces together and guiding these leaders through that helps them gain the skills to get to that next level, which ultimately would probably take them to the CEO or a chairperson level.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
That's interesting. That's awesome.
Interesting.
That's good
Fascinating
stuff.
story.
This is
Yeah.
all so good. And
Yeah.
I must say, John, when you were discussing your leadership principles and the analogy of the theater, I can't think of a better way of exactly what you do within leadership and within your coaching program of exactly what that is. Speaking as a theater kid myself,
Yeah.
I totally got that. So I do have, it may seem like a base question for you after all that we've discussed, but I just have to know, and this is my own personal, little thing that I need. What audition song did you sing for your first play of The Sound of Music?
Edelweiss.
Nice.
Great. Mine was
very nice.
mine was these. I also used The Sound of Music, and I used these are a few of my favorite things. That was mine.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one too.
Well, so I have to tell you a story. So at the time we were doing The Sound of Music in my city, which was Salt Lake City, we had Jerry Lewis's telethon there, the Easter telethon.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
and so we were asked to go on the telethon, and we had to do my favorite things with the stage bedroom that we had
Yes.
there and everything. So yeah, that's one of my favorite songs and
Yeah.
everything. But yeah, that Jerry Lewis thing was pretty amazing because I met Gary Burkhoff and Glenn Close and
Oh wow.
Nice.
a lot of people from Sesame Street and Bob McGrath and Bob Denver and so all these different players and that was just very interesting. But yeah, that's the song that they sang.
That's really, really cool. I love it.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, John.
Yes,
this
this
has
is
been really, really
amazing.
interesting to talk with you about all these, like, how all these interactions, these engagements, like, influenced you throughout your life. And that's what we try to do on this show, is
Absolutely.
to encourage people to have these experiences. Yeah, even though they could be, unfamiliar, going to new places where the culture could be so different. But yeah, so thankful that you were able to share
Yeah.
Well,
Really
your
appreciate it.
story.
thanks for letting me talk so much.
There's so
Oh,
much
this
Oh my
was
back.
gosh,
awesome.
no, it was amazing.
But it's maybe we can get together again and I can tell you more of the travels I did when I was younger and the different types of things that we did that helped me understand what I should do with my kids when we were traveling and everything.
Oh, I love your guest behind
Yeah,
you.
who's behind you?
Your guest behind you.
Yes. This is one of our rescues from Doha.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. We've learned so much and certainly enlightening us in specifically in Asian culture, because that's definitely something we've been wanting to explore.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed our episode. Please subscribe, comment, share your feedback with us, because we love to hear from our audience. And as always, please take a look at our website, rhythmandrome.com, where you will find information on all of our episodes, our book. Yes, highly recommend our book. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can help us out by donating to buymeacoffee.com/rhythmandrome so that we can keep producing this podcast for you. And until next time, thank you so much.
Ciao.